business. I know Mike got my back. Skrilla on the track. conventioNOT. What that means is unconventional. Been in the game of you, so comprehend what I'ma give to you. Cause in the instant you can turn your hustle to an institute. I can't stop, I'm on top because I'm conventioNOT. Immaculate how I be rapping it. When I be spitting, you know that you loving it. Covered it, nothing above it, so you could go run with it. Now let's get back to it. Back to the basics. Carving out spaces. Practice patience for situations and all vibrations. I want all my eyes can see and I'ma beat you there. I aim for variety like a sneakerhead. I'm game ready, keeping that thing steady. Climbing over the dragon. Now who wanna bang with me? Will you grow and change with me? Go through the same with me. For those that don't grow, they known to remain shifty. I'm working with all I got, so when you see me, you know what.
So here we are. It's our first greatest hits kind of episode. I don't know if greatest hits is the right thing.
I feel like it's a bunch of sneak peeks, a bunch of we clearly didn't select a bunch of mistakes and screw ups, so it's up for interpretation. But I think we got some great hits here.
Yeah, well, I think like over 2 years of doing the show, it's early 2021 now, right? We've heard some crazy stuff, and so we started to kind of collect some of those clips and introduce them. This is maybe a little bit more like radio host than we've ever been. So much of our show is really just focused on ad lib. There's not a lot of planning, Mike, that we do ahead of time, but this one we planned a little bit.
This was almost, I don't want to say work, but let's just say there's a spreadsheet involved, and Ryan made it maybe a little more complicated than necessary, but it's for us this is really fun because we're at this point, we're 60 plus episodes, where I want to say this will probably be 64, 65, and as our older guests recall, we didn't start with any interviews or anything like that. So I think though at this point we've probably talked to over 40 people. That's roughly. And this was really fun because I have to admit, man, we did a lot of interviews last year and none of these slid through the cracks, but revisiting them it reinvigorated, and it made me feel like I was right back in that conversation. It got my heart going. It got me a couple of them got me pretty intense. A couple of them got me a little morose, but that's the show, right? And I think today what we're going to try to do, and this probably won't be the one and only time we do this, but we're just going to try to chat about a couple of these little clips, just kind of what they meant for us, and hopefully any of you guys know where to find all of them. We're going to make sure you know who the guest is and whatnot, what episode it's from, but yeah, that's the idea.
We'll do a little format. The one that spoke to me that I wanted to at least pivot into the first one with was going all the way back to what seems like a long time ago, which was kind of like the beginning of COVID. We had Dave Salmoni on, and Dave is a Animal Planet personality. Dave's also a large predator expert, and I think that Dave has recently made his way into some home improvement stuff via some things that his wife is doing on some shows here and there in Canadian TV. And so Dave, and what we're going to pivot to here shortly, Mike, I'm sure you got a thing or two about Dave and recalling that, but is that he starts to talk about learning how to take advantage of his superpowers as a human, which is something that not a lot of our people talk about. Not a lot of our guests talk about the superpowers that they have so directly. But not a lot of our guests wrestle tigers. And he also shares a bit about his first interaction with a real tiger. So heavy. So I got chicken skin just thinking about it. One time somebody asked me, I was in a job interview. This is no joke. I was meeting with the CEO, the head of science, and the head of human resources of this company. It was a Friday late morning interview. It wasn't the first interview I had gone on that week, so needless to say, I was trying to improve with every interview. And on this one, I thought I would dress up. I wore a suit.
And just to be clear, in my former life, before I moved to Hawaii, I would never, ever, ever go to an interview without wearing a suit. But you need to kind of just pick up the read the room. And I failed to do that. And I kind of thought wearing a suit would be appropriate, even though no one here really wears suits unless they're going to court. Anyways, at one point in the interview, and it was at a pretty stale point in the interview, I think everyone there was bored, to be perfectly honest. I'm not going to say who the company was or anything like that, but one of the interviewers, actually, it was the CEO. He looked at me and he said, Mike, what do you think your superpowers are? And I got to be honest, man, I was like mid-30s at this point. I had a couple good jobs. I got a couple degrees. Like, I was like, man, like, I didn't say this, but I'm thinking like superpowers. I don't have superpowers, man. I got a couple degrees. I got experience. I got education. Like, it's all there. It's all there. You want to talk? But like, I could tell he wanted an answer. And like I said, at this point in the interview, it had gotten a little stale, a little, I don't want to say awkward for me, but I don't know about for them. One of them's wearing a hoodie. The other one's got flip-flops on. So I think about it. I contemplate this, and I'm struggling because I'll be honest, I don't know what they want to hear. And, you know, most of us at interviews are supplying as much of what we assume others want to hear as possible. So I run out of thoughts, and I just look at them and I say, I don't know. I can be the guy that wears a suit, I guess. I laughed. The HR lady, she laughed. The two boss guys, they didn't think it was super funny.
They didn't laugh?
No, they didn't laugh. They didn't laugh. I didn't, I didn't get a call back. I didn't, whatever.
At least you knew at that moment. At least you knew.
I truly did. I truly knew. You know what? I don't think these guys want me on their team.
Well, I guess luckily the zookeeper for Dave didn't take that same perspective after he caught him chasing a lion in a field on his first day of work.
So good.
Let's pivot. Let's get to that. Here's Dave.
I don't mean everything I've done is very easy, but I definitely feel like I've understood things faster. When someone sees a lion coming, I already saw it 30 seconds ago. If someone says, "Oh, geez, Dave, don't push that button. That's the button that's going to have him coming to eat you," I can comprehend why they say, "No, that's not exactly how they think. That's not exactly how they make that decision." And I'm not talking these are dumb people without any experience. I'm just saying I've always found myself in scenarios where it just kind of felt like I get it a little bit. And because of those sensitivities and understandings, you get more excited. And then that's sort of, it fills your passion, it throws your passion into it. And then you become what it is that you're good at, I guess.
It's really nice to feel, unique even in a small skill set of professionals, right? Like you might be sitting around some people who went to school longer than you or, whatever. It might be a heritage thing and they got, lineage has been, I would imagine in that world that exists.
Yeah, totally.
But there's something inside you that you had before anyone taught it, and like you maybe have probably developed it and maybe kind of gotten better at utilizing that thing, but that thing was probably always in you, right? I mean, I
think so. I think that I've often said to people, you can teach 75% of my job, right? So if I saw another guy, either one of you guys, square shoulders, athletic, good sense of yourself, your abilities, with those skills, I can teach you how to read a dangerous animal of any kind. Mm-hmm. And I can teach you the logical, smart ways to operate in a scenario 75% of the way. The unfortunate truth about dangerous animals, the ones that, are life or death, when you're in those other 25%, you're dead. And you don't get two chances to be dead. I can't go back to you and say, hey, let's break down the film and see what you did wrong. You cannot teach certain parts of what you need to have when you're dealing with those kind of animals.
Well, and from afar, those things seem to be like, sorry to cut you off, Mike. I'm here too.
No.
So like, those appear to be superhuman I guess, traits if you're from afar, right? If I'm watching you, not just you, if I'm watching anybody from afar, you could teach 75% of people how to hit a baseball too.
Yep.
But there's that superhuman trait that kind of creates this different type of an aspect. So, I mean, I guess, when I think about somebody who's an expert with predators, I think about people who are either they were fighters at one point in time, or they were athletes at one point in time, or they wanted to get involved with that. Can you take us back to that kind of like beginning, the first time you touched a big cat, became interested in a big cat?
Yeah, very easy.
Or like, how did it start there?
It's such an interesting. Everything's cliche. I feel like at my age, everything becomes a cliche, and then you understand what a cliche is. So. Yeah. When I was a kid, on my walls were pictures of big cats. I was an athlete. I loved football. I'd watch the Chicago Bears every single day that I could, but I didn't have Walter Payton on my wall. I had lions and tigers. I have a scrapbook from when I learned to talk. And my mom, what are you going to be when you grow up? And it was a zoologist. And my mom laughed. She said, what the fuck's a zoologist? So the interest in animals began at birth, let's call it. Always liked them. But then the growth pattern was just, I didn't do well in school. I didn't like being told what to do. I just liked animals. If I had to do a speech or a book report or a project, fine, I'll do it in animals. At least I'd be interested. Fast forward to wanting to go to university. I didn't truthfully want to go to university. I wanted to leave home. That's what you did. You left high school, you went to university, you had a great party. So that's biology, because once again, I didn't know what else to do. The only thing I was really in love with was animals. And then it was through that. University eventually says, we're not going to tell you what to do. Do whatever you want. You want to drink your way out of to your tuition? Go. And if you actually like this and want to do this and do something, then here. So in my fourth year, you had to choose a thesis. And I got lucky enough to do mine on black bear behavior. And that was the first time I was outdoors, my own brain, my own hands, tracking bears. And I was working with the Ministry of Natural Resources trying to figure out how to manage nuisance bear populations. Okay. And it was the first time I was like, oh, this is a thing. Like, you can now do this. And there are people who do this, and you can
could be a job, right?
Yeah, And it was so exciting. I can't tell you at what age is that? 20? You're 20 years old with a telemetry thing in the middle of the bush looking for bears. And there were times you'd turn your machine on and the machine would say, there's a bear within 9 feet of you. And you look at this thing, it's like, oh my God, it's a 700-pound bear. He's within 9 feet of me and I can't see him.
And I can't see him.
Yeah. So that's where you're like, holy crap. So I really excelled at that part of university. And then obviously at that point it's master's, PhD, all that kind of stuff. But at that point, I could see the way forward was lab work. And that wasn't me. I was like as dirty and hands-on as life got. I wanted to be the guy turning on the machine with the bear around him. I didn't want to be the guy in the lab going, hey, go out and get me some data.
Yeah.
So the only place a guy growing up in a small town in Canada that I know that can work with animals is a zoo. So I started applying to every zoo around because I thought, I didn't know what people did at zoos, but I thought, hey, that'd be a great place to work because be hands-on with animals. And I got lucky enough to go to a guy who owned a privately owned zoo. He was an animal trainer, and he believed that animals did not belong in cages. He believed that if you were going to be at his zoo, you should be trained and allowed to come out of your enclosure. And that was everything from the elephants who would go for swims every day and play in the forest, the tigers who could go and do it, go swimming, climb trees, do whatever they wanted, to the lemurs and everything else. And that's where my animal training and exotics started.
Like an internship type of a thing?
No, I left university. I literally showed up with a business suit on and my thesis in hand saying, hey, I want to work for you. He laughed at me. He hired me at first. He laughed at me. My first day of work, he says, I don't care about your research. I don't care about your thesis. He goes, you're 220 pounds. You look like you can shovel a lot of shit. And that's what we do here. And he said, but if you're interested, this might be something you'll find fun. And interestingly, I was 2 weeks into that job. So I'm just a shit shoveler. I'm out shoveling, and obviously you don't start at the worst. I am walking out with a wheelbarrow full of poop. I see a big male lion with a mane running around the corner, looks me in the face. And I look him and I see the leash and there's nothing attached to it. No person, nothing. There's just a big male lion. I'm like,
oh shit.
But this is it. This is me saying to myself, I stared at pictures of lions since I was 4 years old in my bedroom. I stared at those pictures like, I wonder what that feels like. I wonder what it smells like. I wonder, and from every picture in my head, that lion looked happy. Just like every dog that runs up to you with a wagging tail or hunching with their teeth growling. To me, this lion looked happy. I could tell he liked me. I walked up to him, I started petting him. I'm like, man, oh man, I'm finally doing it. The excitement blew my brains out. And then the trainer came running around to catch up his lion. He's like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. Anybody who would run up to a male lion to pet it with nobody around to keep him safe, you are the dumbest man on the planet. But he said, but this lion clearly likes you and you clearly like it. Do you want to start coming in on your days off or before work? And you can be my backup to walk the lion. So I would come in every day before work. I would cut up all the lion treats. I would get all the leashes ready, everything you needed for a lion walk. And I would then walk for an hour before work and an hour after work so that the lion could get out and have some extra walks. And that was sort of my impetus into the career that I've had.
So a couple months ago, we talked with Jason Goggins, a former police officer who's now a personal trainer and kind of a weight loss expert consultant. Jason, we didn't know Jason at all. And Jason and I, Ryan and Jason, we had no former knowledge. He's one of those awesome listeners that reached out and, just kind of asked about the show. And within 3 minutes of talking to Jason, I knew it was going to be an amazing episode. I literally he got my blood going in a good way. He got my heart racing. It was like, dude, I can see why you're a personal trainer. And we covered a wide variety of things. We really did. And Ryan, if you recall, this part varied a little bit. And I think, maybe I'm a little bit jaded and I'm hung up on the social media that I'm following and how misleading and sometimes damaging it can be to the psyche when you're confusing the reality with perception. I just thought Jason had such an amazing, sincere, honest take on that.
I listening through some of these episodes and bringing Jason back into context. I think that it's interesting the way that he not only explains the work he does, but how he frames making a change from law enforcement into the world of training. And he's a big weight loss trainer. I think we learned specifically in the show. So you probably got to listen to the bigger episode to get all of that. But this is a pretty cool clip that we picked out. Enjoy.
Jason, you touched on something, and I just want to go back to it real quick because I think I feel like this is something you probably have in abundance, whether you kind of are sharing it or not. And it's that focus on the aesthetic aspect of fitness or working out or losing weight or whatever. It has such a damaging psychological role, and that constant I don't look like this yet. I don't look like this. Hey man, I'm sorry, but you're probably never gonna look like that. We need, we need to maybe adjust what you're going for here, because that's like an 18-year-old who hasn't ever had a beer yet or lived life. So that's not what you should be chasing, ma'am. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, but that's what I think of when I think of having to deal with what you have to deal with today, is the added level of being a therapist for all of your clients, right? Hey, rule number 1 is delete all your social media accounts. I don't.
And I've told people you need to unfollow the influencers because they can be pretty damaging. And there's a lot of layers to what you're saying there, man. It's interesting because first and foremost, looking for that ripped, lean, shredded aesthetic, people think that's what they want, right? They don't realize what it takes to get there. And what gets you to 15% body fat is not what's going to get you to 8% body fat. And that trek from 22% body fat to 15 is a lot easier than the trek from 15 to 8. And I can't tell you how many people have come to me and gotten to 15% body fat and said, look, I want to go all the way. I want to get ripped and shredded. And they get about 2 weeks into it and say, screw this. It's not worth it, because there's a sacrifice. And I always tell people there's going to be a sacrifice somewhere. You're either going to sacrifice by not being 8% body fat and staying at 15, which is still a pretty good look, or you're going to sacrifice everything you love. You're going to sacrifice family. You're going to sacrifice family time. You're going to sacrifice food you love. You're going to sacrifice going out and grabbing beers with your friends. You're going to sacrifice something to get there. And it comes down to, what are you willing to sacrifice? And here's kind of the litmus test I tell people is, if you just have this bucket list goal to be 8% body fat one time in your life, I can sign off on that. If you tell me I want to get 8% body fat and stay there, nobody stays there. Nobody stays there. Bodybuilders don't stay there. Fitness cover magazine cover models, whatever they're called, they don't stay there. They diet down for the photo shoot. Yep. And then they they go back up to 12, 13, 14. They stay pretty lean still, but nobody lives shredded. Nobody does. And what a lot of people in my industry do, personal trainers especially, is they take one period of their life and they diet down to get shredded. And then they take a bunch of pictures. And those become the pictures they use in all their social media postings. Forever. Yeah. And if you meet them one time, you realize, hey, you don't look like you do. And they still look good. I'm not knocking them, but they don't look like that. Right. And the problem is, it's selling a false aesthetic. It's selling a false dream that most people, and you mentioned, you're 18, you haven't had a beer yet. And it goes beyond that. You're 18, you don't have kids yet. You don't have a wife or a husband yet. You don't have a job yet, a career yet. You don't have responsibilities yet. You aren't losing sleep. If people always say, well, you hear people talking about you gain weight as you age, right? Like it's an inevitability. Metabolism tanks as you age. That's scientifically untrue. Do we have some metabolic slowdown as we age? Yeah, but it doesn't justify the weight gain that most people realize. We do start losing muscle in our 30s, but not enough to justify the weight gain. The problem is, when you get in your 30s and 40s, you got it's responsibilities. Yeah. You still eat like a knucklehead, but and you're just loaded up with responsibilities and more stress and all that, and it becomes a lot harder to maintain. So tell that guy, that girl, to take care of your 3 kids. Take them to the little league, help them with their homework. Focus on your career, tend to your marriage, go to church, eat well. Work out, and do it so much so that you get 8% body fat. That's a tough go, man.
It's literally, be honest, it is not humanly possible without, and this is the problem, right? Like, at the end of the day, there are still figures in the media that we see, and we're like, well, that guy's got kids, and that guy, well, yeah, man, he's also got a bunch of doctors, and there's some special supplements out there that, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, that's the other thing to me is just when we were kids, man, we weren't really being that influenced.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like, it really terrifies me to, and I don't we don't have to talk anymore about social media, because that's the negative component of everyone's world now, right? Yeah, like, it doesn't matter if you're in fitness, if you're in real estate, if you're in anything, it's, man, this shit that everyone thinks is real, it ain't real. And I got to be the one to break the bad news to everyone all the time. And it's like, well, that's why, not just why we have you on the show, Jason, but like, there's a lot of integrity in that, man.
Oh, man. So this guy's one of the guys, we've had a few interviews throughout time, Mike, that I would say maybe challenge some of the personal values that that I have. I'll be vulnerable enough to say that on like a show like this, little look back episode.
It wasn't the first thing we did. The first thing we did wasn't go out and look for someone that we don't know or don't necessarily agree with. I'd like to think we're building towards this objective journalism, that we've been hoping to build towards. Obviously not just objective. You're not going to get me and Ryan without a little bit of spice and flavor, but this guest in particular, I'm not going to say I was proud of us. I thought the interview was great. I don't think there was any discourse or, discomfort. Well, maybe a little discomfort, but I wasn't uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say that Rick Jordan from the Faith Maverick episode, he was certainly more polished, I think, than we ever had imagined.
Yeah.
At least at that point in time. I think
Absolutely.
we make good audio. And
this is Mr. Rick Jordan. I want to say his I think his handle is like Rick Jordan TV or something. I mean, this is so our listeners know. Rick is not. There's some anomalies here compared to a lot of our other guests. We're not stereotyping Rick or saying Rick is ultimately flawed due to those differences, but more so, this one was fun because it really gave us an opportunity to talk to someone, to converse with someone, and to actually work through some things that we didn't necessarily agree with. And we weren't also necessarily informed about some of the things that Rick has really dedicated a lot of time and passion and energy to, and was more than happy to tell us all about.
So this one's a short slice, just to some of those pieces of kind of. I like to think of us as pretty conscientious objectors. So this is probably about as flavorful as it gets on the show. But here you go. Rick Jordan, Faith Maverick. With such an illustrious resume like that, or, let me say maybe with such cool qualifications that way.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to sort like where your like primary skill set was there.
Yeah.
Like when you think about like where your primary skill set was at that point in time, like did you start to become an entrepreneur, or is cybersecurity something you sell or something you design? I guess
both.
just to kind of help. Okay.
I crossed over to the dark side a few years ago. When I say that, I moved out of the engineering side into sales, and just running the business and building the business. And
so
there's not a lot of
software.
Yeah.
You started making some real money. Good for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Right on. Well, I transitioned from doing the job into building a business. That's really the transition that took place, because most will go out there, like me. I mean, I was laid off from a job, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to do this for myself now. I knew I needed people, in order to grow. That was cool. But it was when I made the definitive decision to stop doing the job and to build and grow a business, that's when things really started taking off monetarily.
So is that the industry? And you kind of mentioned like you had some involvement with the ministry, maybe falling out. I don't know if you're still a Christian or not, but like, are you like, so was your skill set built and like your industry experience kind of in that cyber world? Are you guys like building firewalls and stuff? I mean, just like foundationally, right? Because we have a pretty like technical listener group that,
cool. Awesome.
Certainly interested in like,
dude, I built my first computer when I was 10 years old.
Right.
A Tandy computer. Yes. Okay. When I was 10. Yeah. So that's good to know about the audience, man. Technically, yes, absolutely. So during that transition, but I've been playing instruments since I was 5. My dad had a music degree. So there's the tie into the music side. And he was also on the board at the church, So I started the same year I started building computers is the same year I started playing drums in the church band. It was simultaneous with that. And then when I was 16, that's when I wanted to do law enforcement, for a protective thing. So I became a police cadet. But then going through the tech stuff through those years was just more of a hobby. And then I really, really got involved when I said, screw the law enforcement stuff, because the Marines didn't want me. Just medical history of asthma, that kind of thing. And I started working for Merrill Lynch, but in the warehouse, and people saw that I had an aptitude, and they pulled me out of there and trained me on the job. And I ended up deploying in the enterprise space after I learned, if you want to get technical, DHCP, DNS, firewalls, routing, IP, everything during that time period. Within 6 months, it was like a freaking crash course, like a boot camp. I deployed 15,000 servers and 120,000 workstations across all of the branch offices of Merrill Lynch across the U.S.
So this is like early on.
This
like
when I was 18.
18 years old. The years. Not to date you too much, but it was like
22
early
years
on.
ago. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say,
that makes good sense.
Mid to late 90s is where my head was.
Yeah.
Like
pre-managed service providers. Like this isn't even an idea. Data centers are like, that's like Pentagon shit at that point in time.
Yep.
You're like really protecting the actual endpoint units.
Right on. Exactly.
So I guess this was this guest, Wendy Freeman, was part of our Metro Atlanta set that we did in 2020. We interviewed a few people from around like the outside of Atlanta, and Wendy was one of them. I can't quite remember how Wendy came through us. I think she might have been a listener who reached out or something like that. But she runs a event planning business that makes conferences, not events from, let's say, like a wedding planning or a party type thing. Not to say that she doesn't plan parties or those types of things, but it seemed that during her process, she learned how to take an event and push it online. And it's something that she shared with you and I, Mike. I really didn't know too much about event planning. Or certainly not like trade show event planning.
That's the part of it that I think is really difficult to appreciate, is like the minutia, and not just that, but the idea of, listen, when you have a party, the goal is for people to show up. But when you throw a corporate event, there's some closing, right? Like there's a little bit more of a quantifiable product other than people just walking around with smiles on their faces.
Yeah.
I thought Wendy, I thought I was really impressed how open Wendy was about like, hey man, that's the goal. And like, ultimately I'm charging for something. And when people want something in return, I have experience. I have quantifiable results that my conferences, they don't just get people in the seats, and that I was like, damn, you guarantee that? And, she was persuasive. I thought Wendy was powerful, really powerful.
Yeah. I think this, I guess it's almost like a 15-minute clip, somewhere in that length, but I think this one's worth a listen.
So can I ask you a couple other questions? Do you find yourself to normally be like a little controlling?
I might have some control issues. I have been working on those.
That's okay.
I think that stepping into entrepreneurship has really helped me to release some of those, because there's a lot of things that you just don't have control over. I've gotten real comfortable being uncomfortable. I've got real skilled at that. That was like my biggest learning.
Yep.
And something else, in corporate, I would bring on other planners and to work with, because these huge technology events, they're just massive events. One person can't do them on their own. And what I found, and even working with other planners, they're order takers. They're control freak order takers. This is how it has to be. What do you want done? I'm going to do it. And so for me, one, I want it to be relationship. I want to collaborate. I don't want to just run the show. This is your show, your vision.
Got it.
I want to help make sure you're making strategic decisions, that you're spending your budget in the best way. If you say, I want this at my event, it's not just going to be like, okay, I'll get that. Why do you want that? What is that? How is that going to affect the attendees? What's that going to do for you? Would you consider the possibility of doing this instead, which will get you the same result for significantly less money? Or, just really approaching it from a strategical standpoint, and shifting my planning process that way has really allowed me to release the control, because it creates conversation and it creates teamwork and collaboration versus, I told you this is the way we're going to do it. You don't think this is a good idea. And now I'm frustrated.
Well, I think part of that natural, sorry, Ryan, but just, if you've done something a bunch of times and it worked, why change it, right? But I guess there's something to be said. Each client wants to feel unique and individual, and you've gotten better at realizing that, like, if treated as such, there may actually be some real value in that, Exactly.
And just because it's worked for me doesn't mean that their idea is not going to be even better and work even better, that I can then execute with future clients as well.
Exactly.
I feel like when we end up peeling that onion back a lot, and then we talk about things like throwing an event is flipping hard, right? Whether it is just that dinner party or whether it's that 500 person people, and there's different budgets and there's different some of us meditate beforehand, and some people before events get off the plane and get like wasted and head to the event. Like there's a lot of social part of how that works. But one of the things that I've always observed, and I think in just like the 20 minutes of talking to you, I realize how valuable your perspective and your business is, that it often ends in excess. Okay. And so again, most of my career is siloed in healthcare, technology and healthcare, but often what ends up happening is that to wash away the risk of those things being too eccentric, right? Mm-hmm. Like, because a lot of us have been to an event that's like one of the best events, but the reason that the event is so good is because there's a star who's like this event planner. But as the person who's sponsoring an event or building an event, in most cases, it's because of the content. That's what you want to showcase. And, bringing pay for vendors in and having a sales floor and all those things are very complicated. But I'm curious how you transitioned away from that, because you said you were in tech for 15 years in Atlanta. I don't want to make a judge on how old you are, but we're on the screen here. I'm going to guess that like you started that part of your career relatively young. And so you've probably have seen it, right? Like you've seen the $500,000 trade show booth and you've like lived that stuff. So how does that transition like work today? And maybe like it's easier to kind of summarize or distill it into COVID, but like how do you transition that? Because I'm going to guess you make a lot more impact at those smaller level things now. And then like what doesn't work from before, if you're comfortable sharing where you worked or what industry of tech you were in.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a risk management technology. So for enterprise class risk management technology. And I actually started there. It was a startup. I was the fourth employee. By the time I left 12 years later, we were up to 700 employees.
Equity?
So of course. So of course I was very fortunate because I really got to experience all different sizes of events, all levels of growth. And I joked that it was kind of like entrepreneurship light, where there was 4 employees. I didn't have the financial investment, but I got to feel what that, 60, 70 hour weeks were like. Is this going to work? Let's just throw this at the wall and see if it sticks. And that was actually one of the main reasons. Well, back to what you were saying, these big events and the impact and all of that is one of the main reasons that I left, was that those events, while they were fun, and planning technology events, whether it's a trade show or a customer conference, the budgets are huge and you can do incredible, fun, creative things. So like that was awesome. But at the end of the day, that event, like it was making somebody's job easier. Like that was the impact it had. And
that's a really cool perspective on that.
I just wasn't fulfilled. Like I loved the event planning, but I wasn't fulfilled like I experienced when I to events as an attendee. That feeling that of people getting up and doing group share or, doing a share, or the breakthrough that they had, or you see somebody figuring out they have no clarity and then they gain this clarity because of this inspirational speaker. I was like, I want a piece of that. Like I want a behind the seat. Like I might not have my own inspirational, which I've since, I might not be a speaker on stage changing lives, but I want to create the space where lives are changed. And that was really the impetus for me of being like, I'm done. I
love that.
You can work your way up the corporate ladder. I was traveling. I did all the things that society tells you to do.
Yeah.
But I still wasn't happy.
All those boxes were checked. You're making a good salary. Your bosses told you were good at your job. And you were just like, this shit is not fulfilling.
Right. I was like, why am I still not happy? I didn't have purpose.
But the payoff, to become a master of your craft and to not have that payoff there. And I think this happens to a lot of other careers. I'm sure, we all have friends that are in this environment, but you compete and you compete and you compete. And then it's at like the top of the mountain or the near top of the mountain. And it's stormy on the other side, right? Like there's not much payoff for continuing on.
Right.
Well, I think
so
sometimes...
Was there an event?
Sorry.
Not to use the term event. Sorry, Mike. But was there like something that made you say, oh man, I'm not going to do this anymore? Was it,
there was
that way?
There was a lot of transition in the company. We got purchased by a private equity firm, brought in new management. which I think kind of contributed. But at the end of the day, for me, when I was such a key part of the business, growing it for so long as an early on employee, and then you grow more employees, you're up to 700. I was still reporting to the board, but I didn't feel like, I felt like a cog in the machine. Like I didn't feel like I was making that impact, that I had a whole lot. It's like, yep, Wendy knows what she's doing. We're going to let her go and run with it and do it. But there was less creation. We had built the company already, and it was the same thing over and over. Yeah. Whereas now, I mean, granted, it was at that point, it was I either become CMO, which I had no desire to do, or I go back to another startup and do the same thing, which I love doing that because I get to create. There's no monotony. Every day is different. And then I was like, no, just do it for yourself. Yeah. Focus on, and because of my experience, I'm able to do masterminds and seminars and workshops and virtual and conferences. Like I'm not planning the same type of events. Whereas for them, it was trade shows, customer conferences, trade shows, customer conferences. The level of creativity was, it's time to do a new booth and some new graphics this year. Or, what do we want our stage set to look like, versus a variety of types of events and working with a variety of different people.
It had run its course. I mean, like Ryan said, you mastered your craft and it got boring. I think that's fair for a lot of people. It's nothing against the craft. It just means maybe take that craft and apply it elsewhere.
Right. And for some people, complacency is fine and it's comfortable. And to be honest, I was one of those people. I was complacent for a couple of years before I made the decision. And then it was just something I kind of hit that point in my journey that was like, okay, I'm ready to leap. I'm ready.
I want to go back to something that you said that I think is a really cool message, especially when you're in a place, and Atlanta isn't the only place in the United States. Austin is like this. New York is like this. The big places where there are 1,000 startup ideas. And I don't know if you're intending to touch on this, but maybe and hopefully I'm not reading too much into it. But when you experience a certain amount of success in a company and you build one, it's not that abnormal to say, oh man, this stuff's getting too big for me. Sometimes that's a cash event for somebody, but very rarely does that cash event mean that you're done. That you're done. But what happens next is that out of the woodwork comes all of these ideas. And I'm going to hone in on Atlanta because that's where I've been for a decade. And I understand that part of it. There are so many ideas, and it becomes actually kind of hard once you validate that in the market. You're with a company, whether it was, if for those of our listeners who aren't familiar, often when you go to private equity, you're quote unquote selling, right? And team sticks around, but things corporatize. Just for a very high level discussion. I don't know that was a situation with you, but
it was.
Then all of a sudden, the people who have built a business, their cousin has an idea to start a bourbon outfit, and then their other buddy wants to do a conference on sneakers, and there's all these things, right? But I really want to commend you, and I feel like I'm making more of a declarative than asking a question here, but the question is one, do you remember that? Do you identify with what I'm talking about? But two, how did you start to sort through and then say, you know what, I think I want to do this on my own? Was that instantaneous, or did you mess around with some other stuff? Or
so I totally resonate with what you're saying. Two, I went through a phase where I started going on interviews. I just knew it was time for a change. And so I started going on interviews and got offered a couple of jobs, and it just didn't feel right. And then I got more, I invested in a couple of different coaching programs. I hired a mindset coach, and it was through that I was able to gain clarity. And honestly, it was my mindset coach who had, he was like, you are not living up to your full potential. There is so much greatness inside of you, and you are not using it. Why don't you see this? And I honestly borrowed his belief in me. Sure. And I was like, oh my gosh, because I super admire him. I think he's an incredible individual. And it's if this guy believes in me more than I believe in myself, why am I not doing this?
Sure.
And I just know with the way I am, being a planner and organized, and, I used to joke that I am not OCD, I'm CDO, because the letters have to go in order. I don't necessarily say that anymore. And now I'm a recovering perfectionist because I've learned progress is perfection. But it just kind of got
self-deprecation.
Thank you. It just kind of got to that point. And I was actually at an event. I didn't know, like I knew I was ready for a change. I didn't know what it was. I kept going to all these events and you hear people talking about their vision. And I remember like one day I was crying at an event. I was like, everybody knows their vision. I don't know what I want to do. And why am I, And it was a couple of months later at another event where we did this exercise and they're like, which is where I determined that I was lacking purpose. And that was the real reason of my unhappiness. And then I just, again, started crying. I'm very vulnerable. I have no problem crying. I started crying and I was like, I want to plan events just like this one. And that's when I realized I was doing what I love, but in the wrong space.